That's it. No more hair and fire. Let's get to work. All right, here's the deal. There's a woman named Adriana Smith, and she was 9 weeks pregnant, and she suffered massive blood clots in her brain, and she is brain dead. That occurred about 12 weeks ago because her state says that because at the time she died, she was 9 weeks pregnant. Because of that, they have said her body must be kept from decomposing. It must be flogged with ventilators and pressure-reducing medications and hormones to try to keep the body at some level of function enough that at 32 weeks they can cut her open and pull out what they hope will be a newborn. Now you say to yourself, but wait, what about exceptions for the life and health of the mother? Well, the state and the hospital say it doesn't count because she's already dead. People talk about comas, but that's a very imprecise term. And a medically induced coma usually means somebody's on a ventilator because they've got critical illness, and we have them deeply sedated because it's really uncomfortable to be on a ventilator and be awake. But those people have the ability to get their consciousness back. People we're talking about in this situation don't have the ability to get their consciousness back. People like Karen Ann Quinlan. Quinlan overdosed on alcohol and barbiturates, suffered a lack of oxygen, hypoxia, and as a result of it, her brain was so damaged that she entered a persistent vegetative state. Her brainstem kind of worked. It could control her blood pressure, but the top part of the brain where consciousness exists was gone, and it wasn't coming back. Prior to the Quinlan case, there was no right in the U.S. to separate from a mechanical ventilator. The Quinlans went all the way to the Supreme Court to secure that right for their daughter and all of the rest of us. There was another case of persistent vegetative state, and that woman's name was Nancy Cruzan. Cruzan was injured in a car accident. She didn't need a ventilator, but she needed a feeding tube and artificial nutrition to survive. They knew she'd never regain consciousness, but they had to feed her artificially, or she would die. Nancy Cruzan's parents also had to go to the Supreme Court. They argued that just like we have the right to accept medical care, we have the right to refuse medical care that we don't want. Adriana Smith's case is different. Adriana Smith suffered a catastrophic neurologic injury that damaged the top of her brain, but caused it to swell so much it cut off the circulation to the rest of it. And she's what we call brain dead. And that means in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of medicine, she is dead. Patients in a persistent vegetative state will have some reflexes. They might swallow. They might cough or gag. They'll make some effort to breathe. It may not be normal, but they're alive. People who are brain dead are dead. They don't breathe. In fact, one of the tests we have to do is the apnea test. We take away the ventilatory support and we measure the carbon dioxide in their body, and we watch to see as it rises. And once they hit a critical threshold and they have not made any respiratory effort, that is apnea. And that is one aspect to prove their brainstem is dead. Now, a lot of other things happen once people get to brain death. They don't control their blood pressure anymore. They start urinating uncontrollably because their pituitary can't tell them to reclaim their water. We replace their water. We can introduce a drip called vasopressin, which helps with the pressure and helps them not spill fluid. To the extent their GI tract might work, we can feed some food down it. But we're going to have to give them hormones like thyroxine. Or if their thyroid is still able to produce some thyroxine, we'd have to give them thyroid stimulating hormone to stimulate the production of that. They're dead. Their cerebrum is gone. Their brainstem no longer functions. If you came to me with a patient in a persistent vegetative state and you said, I want you to do everything to keep that patient alive, even if there was no hope that this person would ever regain consciousness, in our laws, because the patient is alive, I would be required to do everything I could to support their life as best I could, because the patient is alive. For a brain dead patient like Adriana Smith, I'm not required to do anything because the patient is dead. We, of course, will try to be sensitive and work with families and help them accept the loss, because it's very hard to accept the loss when you see the lungs move up and down because the ventilator's doing it. We deal with people in cardiac arrest, but that's only as long as we think that they can recover at least to a persistent vegetative state. They're in sort of a twilight zone between alive and dead. So Adriana Smith is dead. She's been dead for 90 days. She's been dead for 3 months. Yet her body is still being forced to produce some basic metabolic function by entirely external support. Not to help Adriana Smith, not to ever make her better. It's impossible to make Adriana Smith better. She's dead.